What does it mean? What is the sense among officers in America? We have invited a law enforcement expert. He's executive director and professor with the School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, and Strategic Studies, Tarleton State University in Texas. Dr. Alex Del Carmen is our guest. Dr. Alex, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Michelle.
Okay, Dr. Alex, this is such a big issue, not just because it's something we see on the news and it's titillating and it's got the police involved, like some of our favorite police mysteries on television. It's got human interest. We can look at news like that, but when it comes right down to it, this is an issue that touches every law enforcement person in America, and because of that, it touches every one of our communities.
Right. I mean, this goes to the fiber of who we are as a nation, not only in the law enforcement community, but also citizens at large. I mean, think about the interactions that we have on a daily basis on our commute to work, on a social event, on weekends. We are all going to be prone to having those interactions with law enforcement at some point in our lives. And so this is the core of who we are. And legally is the core of what our nation is founded on, the principles of the Constitution.
So why is it that, do you think, as you're a man who studies this, you have an understanding of criminology and law enforcement, why are we seeing a 78% spike in firearm-related officer fatalities in America, many of which are ambush-style killings?
I think that there has been, if you go back to the history of our country, I mean, our history is relatively new. I mean, we are a very young country when compared to other countries across the world, and we still have scars from the era of civil rights abuses that took place in our nation, and I think some of that has led to people having fear at the perception that is sadly from time to time negative towards law enforcement. And I think what you find is that there's this momentum in our nation now where there seems to be a sense that and I will underscore some people have towards the law enforcement community, while on the other hand, you have the majority of our country that still supports the good people in law enforcement and still root for what they do, which is one of the toughest jobs in the world, if not the toughest one.
Indeed. I mean, when most of us kiss our spouses goodbye in the morning, we don't have to have in the back of our head they may not come back alive. That's just can be a reality, especially in the world we live in today. And it seems to be very racially charged at this moment. Is this something new? And as someone who studies law enforcement, teaches, a professor with a School of Criminology, is the racism aspect as big of an issue as we see on television?
I think it's a significant issue in the sense that it's become the subject of a lot of discussion, i.e. your program right now. But I think if you look back at where we are now as a nation, right? So you have what is different today in law enforcement versus what it was, say, 20 years ago, is the fact that now you have young police officers that are, for the most part, millennials, which have a very different skill set, a different way of looking at the world. You also have the presence of body cameras. You have the presence of dash cam video. You have the presence of people having cell phones, for the most part, where they can video record anything and download it on YouTube in a matter of seconds. And then you have the expectation of the public that is very different as far as what law enforcement should do in the context of surveys. And so all of those things are happening at the same time, so which has led to a very complicated situation for the good people in uniform to try to understand exactly what it is that they're supposed to do.
Exactly, and that is very difficult. There was the case of one female officer that refused to use her gun to her own peril because she didn't want to be accused of racism. And so we've created this weird dynamic, I would say. A lot of folks are calling for retraining of officers and more dialogue. And yet when I would like your professional take on this, Dr. Alex, because when I look at some of these dash cam and body cam and cell phone accounts, I see people who are doing it wrong when they get pulled over, arguing with police officers in some instances. In some instances not. And we've seen some cases of that, but or running when pulled over, even if they aren't armed. What are you running for? You know, these are things that are hard for most Americans to understand when you're watching this. You know, you pull over, you be respectful. I have tinted windows on my car, Dr. Alex. If I get pulled over, I roll all my windows down and I have everyone put their hands out of the car and say, hey, I know we have tinted windows, just want to let you know there's no firearms in the car, because you just want to have good communication. I'm wondering if we just put too much on our officers and not enough on the civilian population.
Yeah, I mean, Chief Brown, as you may recall, a few months back when we had the tragedy in Dallas, where 5 police officers lost their lives, Chief Brown said it best. You know, the public now expects law enforcement to be social workers, to be caretakers, to be the rescuers of pets. And so we have actually redefined those expectations versus what the job was meant to be in the first place, you know. And then, as you pointed out in your statement, you have people that simply, when they engage with law enforcement, they're unreasonable, they're not polite, you know, and they themselves put themselves in the line of fire. Now, having said that, there are still some law enforcement officers, I would even argue a few, that don't belong in the profession. And those individuals need to be weeded out.
Absolutely.
And part of our conversation should be, how do you prevent those individuals from even coming in to the law enforcement profession? And there's no question that those instances of abuses do take place, and that innocent people sometimes are shot and sometimes are killed in the hands of police officers that should have never been cops. So how do we get those individuals out of the equation? It's really another angle to this.
Indeed, because there are some obvious faux pas. Minnesota, the police officer that was charged with second-degree manslaughter in the shooting of Philando Castile during that July traffic stop. It was in a St. Paul suburb. He was actually found guilty on 2 felony counts because they said, hey, look, the guy said, officer, just want to let you know I do have a gun. We all saw that, and it seemed unreasonable. He seemed to be polite and doing everything right, and yet he died. So yeah, these things are taking place, but I don't think that the racially charged accusations that we like to throw out there are doing anything to really help the situation, rather than finding ways that we can move forward, bring healing. What are your thoughts?
Right. So I think we also need to be sincere about exactly what's going on, and that dialogue needs to take place between all sides, right? So what we need to do is make sure that we understand, A, what are the issues, B, how we can prevent them, and C, how we can heal. And I think that healing process will not take place unless that honest dialogue between all parties or among all parties actually takes place. And until we sit down at the table and we look at each other face to face and say to one another, you know, these are the issues that concern the minority community. These are the issues that concern the non-minority community. And then these are the safety issues that concern law enforcement. Until we have that honest dialogue, I think we're going to continue to see more of the same.
Now, as a man, if you're just joining us, Dr. Alex de Carmen is a law enforcement expert. He's executive director and professor with the School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, and Strategic Studies at Tarleton State University in Texas. So you have kind of your finger on this pulse of this subject. What are some real practical things that you think that we could hope for, expect, or ask for in our law enforcement in this dialogue?
Well, I mean, think about the fact that any time a police officer pulls you over, that police officer is likely going to be nervous because they have no idea who you are. They have no idea if you're going to be greeting them with a gun or perhaps, you know, gonna take off on them and run away. So I think what matters is that we need to be logical, as you pointed out in your own example. Lower the windows if they're tinted. Talk to them in a polite manner. If you have any concerns about them, the streets or where they stopped you is probably not the best place for you to engage in a dialogue with them. You probably need to take their badge number and take it on to internal affairs and file an accusation. But if a police officer becomes abusive and becomes disrespectful, I think you have every right. And in some states, like Texas, where I live, it's what we call a one-party consent state, where you can pull out your cell phone and begin to record it without the consent of the officer. I think that people deserve deserve to have that. But at the
Yes.
same time, it's all about the Constitution, though, Michelle. Remember that. The Constitution affords us the protection from government on a daily basis. And at the end of the day, government is there to support the people, just like we are to support the government in what it does, right? So it's a mutual beneficial component as well.
Well put. I was reminded as you were encouraging us to dialogue, to talk these things out, to get communities and police officers together, of the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He said, people fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they have not communicated with each other. That's Martin Luther King Jr. who said those things. A very wise man and a very wise guest we've had, Dr. Alex Del Carmen. Thank you so much for joining us today and giving us a little insight. We're a country that's in need of healing today, and I thank you for being a part of that.
Thanks, Michelle, for having me.